Now we are going to discuss lesson 3. In this lesson, we will discuss import quotas, subsidies, and the market for illegal goods. An early or late frost, a hot dry summer, and a wet spring present just a few of the challenges that fill the lives of farmers with uncertainty and sometimes with economic hardship. Fluctuations in the weather bring fluctuations in farm output and prices and sometimes leave farmers with low incomes. To help farmers avoid low prices and low incomes, governments intervene in the markets for farm products. Price floors that work a little bit like that minimum wage that you have already studied might be used, but as you have seen, this type of government action creates a surplus and is inefficient. The same conclusion applies to the effects of a price floor for farm products. Governments often use two other methods of intervention in the markets for farm products. First one is production quotas and the second one is subsidies. In the markets for sugar beets, tobacco, leaf and cotton, governments have from time to time imposed production quotas. A production quota is an upper limit to the quantity of a good that may be produced in a specific period. To discover the effects of a production quotas, let's look at what a quota does to the market for sugar beets. Suppose that the growers of sugar beets want to limit total production to get a higher price. They persuade the government to introduce a production quota on sugar beets. The effect of a production quota depends on whether it is set below or above the equilibrium quantity. If the government introduced a production quota above the equilibrium quantity, nothing would change because sugar beet growers would already be producing less than the quota. But a production quota set below the equilibrium quantity has big effects, which are a decrease in supply, a rise in price, a decrease in marginal cost, inefficient underproduction, and incentive to cheat and overproduce. Figure 6.11 illustrates these effects. A decrease in supply, a production quota on sugar beets decreases the supply of sugar beets. Each grower is assigned a production limit that is less than the amount that would be produced and supplied without the quota. The total of the grower's limits equals the quota, and any production in excess of the quota is illegal. The quantity supplied becomes the amount permitted by the production quota, and this quantity is fixed. The supply of sugar beets becomes perfectly inelastic as the quantity permitted under the quota. In figure 6.11, with no quota, growers would produce 60 million tons of sugar beets a year, the market equilibrium quantity. With a production quota set at 40 million tons a year, the gray shaded area shows the illegal region. As in the case of price ceiling and price floors, market forces and political forces are in conflict in this illegal region. The vertical red line labeled quota becomes the supply curve of sugar beets at price above $20 a ton. A rise in price. The production quota raises the price of sugar beets when the government sets a production quota. It leaves market forces free to determine the price. Because the quota decreases the supply of sugar beets, it raises the price. In figure 6.11, with no quota, the price is $30 a ton. With a quota of 40 million tons, the price rises to $50 a ton. A decrease in marginal cost. The production quota lowers the marginal cost of growing sugar beets. Marginal cost decreases because growers produce less and stop using the resources with the highest marginal cost. Sugar beet growers slide down their supply and marginal cost curves. In figure 6.11, marginal cost decreases to $20 a ton. Inefficiency. The production quota results in inefficient underproduction. Marginal social benefit at the quantity produced is equal to the market price, which has increased. Marginal social cost at the quantity produced has decreased and is less than the market price. So marginal social benefits exceeds marginal social cost and a deadweight loss arises. An incentive to cheat and overproduce. The production quota creates an incentive for growers to cheat and produce more than their individual production limit. With a quota, the price exceeds marginal cost, so the grower can get a larger profit by producing one more unit. Of course, if all growers produce more than their assigned limit, the production quota becomes ineffective and the price falls to the equilibrium price. To make the production quota effective, growers must set up a monitoring system to ensure that no one cheats and overproduces. But it is costly to set up and operate a monitoring system, and it is difficult to detect and punish producers who violate their quotas. Because of the difficulty of operating a quota, producers often lobby governments to establish a quota and provide the monitoring and punishment systems that make it work. Now, subsidy. In the United States, the producers of peanuts, sugar beets, milk, wheat, and many other farm products receive subsidies. A subsidy is a payment made by the government to a producer. A large and controversial farm bill passed by Congress in 2008 renewed and extended a wide range of subsidies. The effects of a subsidy are similar to the effect of a tax, but they go in the opposite direction. These effects are an increase in supply, a fall in price, an increase in quantity produced, an increase in marginal cost, payments by the government to farmers, inefficient overproduction. Figure 6.12 illustrates the effects of a subsidy to peanut farmers. First one, an increase in supply. In figure 6.12, with no subsidy, the demand curve D and the supply curve S determine the price of peanuts at $40 a ton and the quantity of peanuts at 40 million tons a year. Suppose that the government introduces a subsidy of $20 a ton to peanut farmers. A subsidy is like a negative tax. A tax is equivalent to an increase in cost. So a subsidy is equivalent to a decrease in cost. The subsidy brings an increase in supply. To determine the position of the new supply curve, we subtract the subsidy from the farmer's minimum supply price. In figure 6.12, with no subsidy, farmers are willing to offer 40 million tons a year at a price of $40 a ton. With a subsidy of $20 a ton, they will offer 40 million tons a year if the price is as low as $20 a ton. The supply curve shifts to the red curve labeled as subsidy. A fall in price and increase in quantity produced. Number 2. The subsidy lowers the price of peanuts and increases the quantity produced. In figure 6.12, equilibrium occurs where the new supply curve intersects the demand curve at a price of $30 a ton and a quantity of 60 million tons a year. Number 3, an increase in marginal cost. The subsidy lowers the price paid by consumers but increases the marginal cost of producing peanuts. Marginal cost increases because farmers grow more peanuts, which means that they must begin to use some resources that are less ideal for growing peanuts. Peanut farmers slide up their supply and marginal cost curves. In figure 6.12, marginal cost increased to $50 a ton. Number 4, payments by government to the farmers. The government pay subsidy to peanut farmers on each ton of peanuts produced. In this example, farmers increase production to 60 million tons a year and receive a subsidy of $20 a ton. So peanut farmers receive payments from the government that total $1,200 million a year. Number 5, inefficient overproduction. The subsidy results in inefficient overproduction. At the quantity produced with the subsidy, marginal social benefit is equal to the market price, which has fallen. Marginal social cost has increased and exceeds the market price. Because marginal social cost exceeds marginal social benefit, the increased production begins inefficiency. Subsidies spill over to the rest of the world. Because a subsidy lowers the domestic market price, subsidized farmer will offer some of their output for sale on the world market. The increase in supply on the world market lowers the price in the rest of the world. Faced with lower prices, farmers in other countries decrease production and receive smaller revenues. Now, we will discuss markets for illegal goods. The markets for many goods and services are regulated, and buying and selling some goods is illegal. The best known examples of such goods are drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, and heroin. Despite the fact that these drugs are illegal, trade in them is a multi-billion-dollar business. This trade can be understood by using the sum economic model and principles that explain trade in legal goods. To study the market for illegal goods, we are first going to examine the prices and quantities that would prevail if these quantities were not illegal. Next, we will see how prohibition works. Then we will see how tax might be used to limit the consumption of these goods. Firstly, a free market for a drug. Figure 6.13 shows the market for a drug. The demand curve D shows that the other things remaining the same. The lower the price of the drug, the larger is the quantity of the drug demanded. The supply curve S shows that the other things remaining the same. The lower the price of the drug, the smaller is the quantity supplied. If the drugs were not illegal, the quantity bought and sold would be QC and the price would be PC. Secondly, a market for an illegal drug. When a good is illegal, the cost of trading in the good increases. By how much the cost increases and who bears the cost depends on the penalties for violating the law and degree to which the law is enforced. The larger the penalties and the better the policing, the higher are the costs. Penalties might be imposed on sellers, buyers, or both. Now let's see penalties on sellers. Drug dealers in the US face large penalties if their activities are detected. For example, a marijuana dealer could pay a $200,000 fine and serve a 15-year prison term. A heroin dealer could pay a $500,000 fine and serve a 20-year prison term. These penalties are part of the cost of supplying illegal drugs, and they bring a decrease in supply, a leftward shift in the supply curve. To determine the new supply curve, we add the cost of breaking the law to the minimum price that drug dealers are willing to accept. In figure 6.13, the cost of breaking the law by selling drugs is added to the minimum price that dealers will accept, and the supply curve shifts leftward towards S. If penalties were imposed only on sellers, the market equilibrium would move from point E to point F. Let's also see penalties on buyers. In the US, it is illegal to possess drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, and heroin. Possession of marijuana can bring a prison term of 1 year, and possession of heroin can bring a prison term of 2 years. Penalties fall on buyers, and the cost of breaking the law must be subtracted from the value of the good to determine the maximum price buyers are willing to pay for the drugs. Demand decreases, and the demand curve shifts leftward. In figure 6.13, the demand curve shifts to D, CBL. If penalties were imposed only on buyers, the market equilibrium would move from point E to point G. What if penalties are imposed on both sellers and buyers? If penalties are imposed on both sellers and buyers, both supply and demand curve decreases, and both the supply curve and the demand curve shifts. In figure 6.13, the cost of breaking the law are the same for both buyers and sellers. So both curves shift leftward by the same amount. The market equilibrium moves to point H. The market price remains at the competitive market price PC, but the quantity bought decreases to QP. Buyers now pay PC plus the cost of breaking the law, which equals PB. Sellers receive PC minus the cost of breaking the law, which equals PS. The larger the penalties, the greater the degree of the law enforcement. The larger is the decrease in demand or supply if the penalties are heavier on sellers. The supply curve shifts farther than the demand curve, and the market price rises above PC. If the penalties are heavier on buyers, the demand curve shifts farther than the supply curve, and the market price falls below PC. In the US, the penalties on sellers are larger than those on buyers, so the quantity of drugs trade decreases and the market price increases compared with the free market. With high enough penalties and effective law enforcement, it is possible to decrease demand or supply to the point at which the quantity bought is zero. But in reality, such an outcome is unusual. It does not happen in the US in the case of illegal drugs. The key reason is the high cost of law enforcement and insufficient resources for the police to achieve effective enforcement. Because of this situation, some people suggest that drugs and other illegal goods should be legalized and sold openly, but also taxed at a higher rate in the same way that legal drugs such as alcohol are taxed. How much would such an arrangement work? From your study of the effects of the taxes, it is easy to see that the quantity bought of a drug could be decreased if the drug was legalized and taxed. Imposing a sufficiently high tax could decrease the supply, raise the price, and achieve the same decrease in the quantity bought as does a prohibition on drugs. The government would collect a large tax revenue. It is likely that an extreme high tax rate would be needed to cut the quantity of drugs bought to the level prevailing with the prohibition. It is also likely that many drug dealers and consumers would try to cover up their activities to evade the tax. If they did act in such a way, they would face the cost of breaking the law, the tax law. If the penalty for tax law violence is as severe and as effectively policed as drug dealing laws, the analysis we have already conducted applies also to this case. The quantity of drugs bought would depend on the penalties for law breaking and on the way in which the penalties are assigned to buyers and sellers. Which is more effective, prohibition or taxes? In favor of taxes and against prohibition is the fact that the tax revenue can be used to make law enforcement more effective. It can also be used to run a more effective education campaign against illegal drug use. In favor of prohibition and against taxes is the fact that prohibition sends a signal that might influence preferences, decreasing the demand for illegal drugs. Also, some people intensely dislike the idea of government profiting from trade in harmful substances. This is all from this lesson. Thank you so much for listening.